The room went quiet the second I stood up. A janitor with a broom leaning on the wall and my name stitched on my shirt, looking a dozen executives in the eye, while the skyline of Atlanta glowed behind them like a stage light. "Don't sign the $3.8 billion deal," I said, voice steadier than my hands, and for a breath, nobody moved. Sloan Rivera lifted one hand like a traffic cop, who never doubts the cars will stop, told everyone to clear the room, and now it was just me, her, and a contract sitting there like a loaded switch. If you're wondering how a night janitor ends up in a boardroom trying to knock a pen out of a CEO's hand, the short version is life swerves when you least expect it. The longer version starts. On floors, I still mop. I work the executive wing at Rivera Global. The hush after 8 p.m. is my favorite sound. The offices smell like cedar and ambition. The lights hum soft, and for a few hours, nobody looks through me like I'm furniture. I like order, I like wiping away the coffee rings and seeing the glass reset to clear, and as a single dad who keeps time by insulin doses and homework and bus schedules, that little order helps. My daughter Zoe is 9, bright as a match, and stronger than any grown-up I know. I keep her test strips in a jar on my counter, and her drawings taped inside my locker, because hope belongs where you can see it, you know what I mean. The night before that boardroom moment, I rolled my cart past the big conference room and saw the lights still on, frost glass, glowing chairs lined up like soldiers. And inside the silhouette, you don't confuse with anyone else, bun, tight shoulders, tighter. Sloan hunched over papers stacked like a skyline. I planned to circle back, give the storm some space, then a pile of printouts slid off the table and hit the floor like a signal, so I knocked. "Want me to come back later?" I asked, and she waved me in without looking up. We both bent to grab pages, and that's when I saw it. A spreadsheet that didn't look like numbers. It looked like a punch. Red ink flagged a column called Post-Acquisition Reductions. And there it was, a code I knew by heart, because it meant my team, Atlanta facilities, the whole division turned into a footnote. 5,000 plus roles across the company neatly labeled for outsourcing synergy, whatever name you use when you don't want to say layoff. I kept my face calm, handed the sheet back like it wasn't burning my fingers. She caught my eyes on the red ink and said, "That's confidential." The words sharp as glass, and I said, "Of course." And I finished my route with my brain racing ahead of my feet. There's a part of my life I don't put on a job application. I used to wear suits and speak in models and pretend spreadsheets tell the whole truth. I worked at a place in New York that makes headlines when it sneezes, and once upon a time there was a deal that smelled wrong. I flagged it. They told me to make the numbers align with the money, and right in the middle my wife got sick, cancer. Doesn't wait for clean timing, so fear made a louder case than ethics, and I blinked. I changed a model. Told myself it would even out. It didn't. The deal closed. People lost jobs. My conscience screamed. My wife passed, and then the firm cut me loose like a coffee filter. I learned how fast a life can come apart. I learned which doors stay open for people carrying mops, and I promised myself that next time I wouldn't swallow the truth just to survive. So that morning, with reporters stacked outside and a playlist of celebration cued on someone's Bluetooth, I slipped in through the service entrance, washed my hands until my nerves went down the drain, and walked into the room where nobody expects the janitor to have anything to say. I brought a roster in my pocket, a printout from an old maintenance login with names that weren't headcount to me. They were shoe sizes and field trip forms and insulin and rent. I waited by the water cooler until the papers slid in front of Sloan and her pen hovered, and that's when I stepped forward and said the sentence that changed everything. She gave me 60 seconds and an arched eyebrow, and I spent them fast, told her what the red ink meant, how the so-called savings were smoke built on cutting people off at the knees, how Arcadia TechWorks looked 30% prettier on paper than it was in daylight, pointed to a compensation clause that balloons. When headcount shrinks, slid the roster across like a dare. And when she asked how a janitor knew a premium from a pumpkin, I told her straight. I used to push spreadsheets for a bank she's done deals with. I caved once and I won't again. She didn't blink, just hit the intercom and postponed the signing. Wrote her address on a card that felt like a ticket to a test. Told me to come at 8 and bring proof, and if I wasted her time, I'd never work on that street again. Yeah, that happened. I dug out my old laptop, the one that boots like it's walking uphill, and I poured coffee that tasted like nerves, built a lean model, pulled public filings, cross-checked Arcadia's R&D claims with patent filings going stale, chased footnotes into subsidiaries where liabilities hide. And by 7:30, I had a story the numbers couldn't keep lying about. Her penthouse looked like a magazine forgot to take it back. Glass to the ceiling, stone cool as a hotel lobby, and a table already set with 2 monitors. "Show me," she said. No small talk, and for 2 hours we moved through the guts of the deal. She asked sharp questions, I answered with the same, and you could feel skepticism fall a notch with every click. Then my phone buzzed. Mrs. Ellison, our neighbor, said Zoe's fever spiked, and the glucose monitor was screaming. So I grabbed my bag, and she grabbed her keys and said, "I'm driving." There's the version you see on TV where the CEO sends a driver, and there's the version where she runs up a stairwell that smells like old paint to an apartment with a broken couch, spring, and a magnet collection on the fridge. And we lived the second one. She stood back while I checked my kid and did the math nobody wants to do about ambulances and deductibles. She made a call, and Cedar Ridge had a room ready. We flew down Peachtree like the lights were listening, and in that hospital noise I wrapped my hand around Zoe's and tried to breathe slow. Sloane stood by the door, made a few calls in a voice you don't argue with, and when the dust settled a little we sat in plastic chairs and talked like human beings. I told her about New York and bad decisions and grief. She told me maybe she's tired of making decisions without touching the people they touch. And I believed her not because of the words, but because she'd just parked her life next to ours and stayed. By afternoon, Zoe was smiling at a sticker. The bill was handled by hands I didn't ask about. And Sloane dropped me home with a card that had her personal number on it and a heads up that HR approved paid time off. "Rest, we're not done with Arcadia," she said, and pride wanted to argue while gratitude told me to shut up and nod. 5 days later, my phone blew up with headlines. Rivera Global puts acquisition under review, CFO calls allegations baseless, and then a knock at my door turned into a warrant. Somebody traced my printout to an old login and decided espionage sounded good in a report. You never forget handcuffs. You never forget your kid's face when Mrs. Ellison pulls her back and tells her to breathe. And you never forget the moment the door opens and your boss walks in with a lawyer who looks like he bills by the heartbeat. "You're coming with me," she said. And in the car she laid it out. A forensic firm confirmed the model. Arcadia's numbers were painted pretty. Ethan Voss was pushing because his comp spiked. If headcount fell, there were kickbacks, there were emails, and in the morning, there'd be an emergency shareholder meeting where she could kill the deal and maybe lose the job her father groomed her for. I told her I'd be there even if I had to stand in the back in a suit that didn't fit. Because once you decide who you are, you show up. Shareholder meetings are church and trial. At the same time, the lights are too bright. The speeches sound rehearsed. The tension hangs like a wire. Ethan went first and talked alignment and noise and rumor like he'd rehearsed it in a mirror. The chair nodded like a bobblehead, then Sloane walked up with one sheet of paper and a face like a storm. She said she promised to grow the company with integrity, laid out the findings clean, no theatrics, then placed a letter on the podium and said, if the only way to keep the title was to ignore the cost to our people, then she wouldn't keep the title. The room split into whispers and glares and phone screens, And hours later, the vote came down, deal dead, Sloan out shares and board seat intact, office keys handed over. And outside she laughed lighter than I'd seen her, said she felt like she'd been holding her breath for years, and I knew that feeling. 3 weeks later, we had a name on a door in a small office with plants that somehow lived, Bright Line Partners. The bright line you can see from far away. We took on a furniture plant in Macon. The last owners planned to hollow out, found a way to keep over 200 jobs with better scheduling and smarter equipment. And by cutting out a useless middleman, and the day those checks went out with dignity attached to them, money felt clean. At home, Zoe drew a picture of 3 people under a too big sun and labeled it with our names. Sloan cried in my kitchen like a person who finally touched the cost and the reward at the same time, and in the park. 6 months later, when an interim chief from Arcadia called asking to partner on a restructure that could save jobs and face, we said we'd listen, because forgiveness can be strategy too. Here's the part that will start a fight in the comments. Some of the board that pushed Sloan out wants her back and know that markets like integrity. Again, there's talk of her returning as executive chair while we keep building turnarounds. And the question smells like gasoline. Is it smart to go back inside the machine if it lets you save more people? Or is that surrender dressed up as strategy? Where's the line? Who gets to draw it? I got a call from New York with a number big enough to make most people forget why they started. The catch was a deal that would cost 1,200 jobs across 3 towns that don't have much else, and they wanted me to make a cleaner story. I told them I'm not in the better story business anymore, I'm in the better outcome business, and I slept fine. If this hits something in you, tell me in the comments where your bright line is. Would you go back inside to change the machine from within, or walk away to build something cleaner? Outside, have you seen a company do right by its people and still win? Or is that just a myth we tell to keep from burning it all down? Share what you've lived, what you've seen, what you believe about titles, power, and the people behind the numbers. And if you want more stories told straight like this, like and subscribe. I'll be in there reading every word.